Stormfront =RK equals Part 1 =RK equals Chancellor's Office, Senate Building, Coruscant. As far as most people in the galaxy were concerned, Satine Kenobi was the most powerful woman in the known universe. Many admired her, some wanted to be her, and many more either coveted her position, wanted to bring her low, or both. Many of the latter groups had good reasons to do it, that much the Chancellor could admit to herself. In the privacy of her own mind anyway. In their position, she might have done the same after all. No matter how much the Republic propaganda machine and her allies screamed it to the heavens, what Satine and her accomplices did was nothing less than a coup, an usurpation of power. And for a great deal of people, their reasons simply weren't good enough, and that was before one took into account the usual core politics, a snake pit to put all other to shame, and one she got herself in the middle of due to her own efforts. The Chancellor had no illusions about the number and power of her enemies nor about the reliability of her allies. After all, many of them supported her for concessions and the hope to eventually control the Republic through her. That knowledge was one of the big reasons why Satine found herself increasingly lacking restraint in dealing with both allies and enemies, something that culminated with giving her tactic approval to Zash so the ancient Sith would do whatever she deemed necessary to keep Kuat on a leash and in their corner. By making that call, and it was surprisingly easy one to make, she proved to herself and many of her detractors that their accusations might have been true all along. Briefly, very briefly, Satine wondered how she ended up in such a position. While she wasn't a figurehead, the lengths she had to go to keep it that way, the deals that she made, the actions she authorized or closed her eyes about. She grimaced. Mere months ago, if someone told her she would be in that position, do things to make most tyrants proud, she wouldn't have believed them. Now, when she held the position of Chancellor for a few months during the worst period in Republic history in ages, Satine's eyes were wide opened about the kind of state she led. The reasons why things went so bad were painfully obvious to see. After all, she was doing the same things countless others did through the ages that led to this mess in the first place. Satine put Mandalore, her home and her people first, the Republic second, just as the Senate and most senators did on a daily basis for the past 1,000 years. It could work, somewhat, in a peaceful era, especially if there was a strong and popular Chancellor on the helm. In the middle of a war that the Republic, if not necessarily losing, wasn't winning either? It was some time back that Satine realized she was the ruler of a state kept on life support. With almost every deal she made lately, her decisions over the immediate strategic goals of the war, the way she had to deal with the myriad of local governments who were seceding. All those things eroded the already shaky foundation that made the Republic everyone believed they knew possible. Now, many of those deals and promises needed to be honored. And no matter what Satine did, there was no way she could satisfy most of her own supporters, much less her detractors in the Senate. Vale didn't have the good grace to die and stay dead after everything he did and put into motion. If his sacrifice at Bothoi had stuck. In a time of war, everyone loved heroes, especially dead, somewhat tarnished ones. An alive Sith who murdered worlds, even if the was on their side? That was much, much harder to stomach. He was Mandalore too, and that complicated everything tremendously. Satine knew what was about to happen once her allies arrived, and she informed them of his return. Some of them, along with everyone who had an axe to grind with her, would put her into the impossible position to choose between Mandalore and their continued support, or in the case of the latter, causing even more trouble than they were already. What Satine wanted to do was simple. She wanted to see Vale on a trial for what he did at Bothoi and damn the consequences. The Chancellor fumed in her seat. Her latest conversation with Obi-Wan, after he actually talked with Vale and heard his explanation about everything he did to that point. Satine wanted to scream and rage, at the universe, at her husband, at Vale and even at herself. When Obi-Wan called, he looked so forlorn and torn. "We've reached an unofficial verdict." Her husband sounded more tired and drained than she had ever heard him before. He looked the part too. Any official sanctions General Vale will receive from the military for his actions at Camino and Bothoi wouldn't amount to more than a slap on the wrist. All I could do was keep people from giving him official commendations about Sullust to top it all. He'll likely get medals and a great evaluation once all details about his actions there had been dissected anyway. That wasn't what Satine wanted to hear, though she feared that might be the case. Obi-Wan had confided to her that the war and especially the events that happened during and after the Jedi coup, especially the fall of the Corellian system and how the Senate handled everything, those events changed many of the high-ranked officers and it wasn't for the better. Before that, for many of them, the war was different. The only real threat the Cis represented to their homes was raids, the odd terror attack. After Corellia, the balance of power shifted. Tactics and strategies that previously would have been unthinkable and morally reprehensible now gained more and more popularity with every passing day. A great number of people awoke to the reality that the Republic might indeed lose the war. And a distressing percentage of governments were, if not all right with that, then accepted it as a preferable alternative to sending their citizens and treasure to be spent in the conflict. Others, well, they saw little to no distinction by a republic led by a Mandalorian, one who supported the Mandalorians and in Vale's face the Sith and the Separatists, so they were almost gleeful to watch the two sides tear at each other, preferably until no one was left. Naturally, there was the third major group, those that decided that now the Confederacy was the lesser threat and their best bet. Frankly, Satine often wondered how there were so many loyal system left in the republic she ran. And the answer was depressingly simple: many of those saw themselves benefiting the most if her side won and then honored its promises. That was something she didn't want to admit to herself, much less most of her closest allies, but if they won the war, the Republic would likely be dead and whatever replaced it, even if it wore the same name and retained many of the same institutions, would be a very different beast and not necessary for the better. That was the best-case scenario too. Speaking of allies, they began to arrive one after another. First to enter were Padme and Mon, escorted by Anakin, who for weeks now acted as his wife's official bodyguard and second shadow. The military still didn't trust Skywalker's priorities, so they decided that for the time being he would be repaying his debt in a fashion everyone knew he would do his damned best to success in. Bail Organa came just behind them, animately speaking with the new representative of Kuat. Their previous senator got recalled soon after Zash arrived there and began shaking things up. Satine knew that a part of her deal with Anara Kuat was to deal with said man, and she didn't look too closely at what happened with him. All she officially was aware of was that the distinguished senator hadn't been seen or heard after arriving at Kuat. Honestly, Satine didn't really want to know what happened to the man, though she suspected he didn't enjoy his homecoming. A brief exchange of pleasantries followed until they waited for the rest of their allies, the representatives of places like Anaxes, Serapin and of course Alzakan. When they all gathered, Mothma was the one to politely request she came clean. "You didn't gather us here on such a short notice for a social call, Chancellor. What is the newest crisis that raises its ugly head?" "General Vale is alive, well and back into Republic space," Satine told them straight. The ensuring silence was deafening. Satine wondered if she removed one of the pins holding her hair in place and dropped it, she could hear it. "Well, that will cause a stir," Organa declared with a smile that didn't really reach his eyes. He was disturbed by the prospect too. "After Bothoi, Prime Minister Ferd and our government have certain expectations about how General Vale should be handled," the Alzakan senator said diplomatically. His light and friendly tone didn't deceive Satine for a moment. Ferd's opposition won a great deal of credit with the local population by opposing and decrying the government at every turn, especially after Bothoi. The situation at Alzakan demanded that Prime Minister Ferd call for Vale facing a trial. It was another question how hard she and her government would really push, however publicly at the very least, their position was clear for all to see. "I'll hear all your concerns, Senators." Organa and Mothma, despite technically being two of Vale's allies in the Senate from before the Jedi coup and the shake-ups that followed, now firmly demanded an accounting. The Jedi should have been watched much more closely after all. Why wasn't the same being done for the Sith, especially now that he was showing his true colors? Anaxes on the other hand, well, Their government and military were generally supportive of Vale, even if Admiral Yularan was a dissenting voice in their ranks. Serapin, as one of the priority targets for the separatist, well, they were all for anything that could bring the war to a victorious conclusion and damn little details like collateral damage. Padme, she was in a complicated position. With news of the new Mid-Rim alliance that currently had its leaders gathered at Naboo filtering through claims from various smugglers, she was all but obliged to support Vale after he saved her world twice more, or so rumor had it. Once upon a time, Satine would have expected that Padme would be one of the people who demanded Vale's head the loudest. However, the bioweapon attack on Naboo, her poisoning and everything that followed, slowly but surely changed the woman. Nowadays, Satine honestly wasn't certain which way she would jump, especially where Vale was concerned. I agree that there aren't many people who would have gone to such lengths at Bothoi, even if they had the capacity for such destruction at their disposal. Padme spoke quietly. Let us be clear about something, however. What exactly do we want General Vale to answer for, and why? Is it out of moral outrage over the destruction of Bothoi and all the innocent people who died there as a direct consequence? The political complications that such an act represents, not the least of which is the possible further escalation of the war? Do you want to accuse him of breaking a particular law? Does it matter if he is clear in the legal sense or not? Or are you going after him for domestic political reasons or personal ones? Thank you, Senator Skywalker. Those are excellent questions. As far as our military is concerned, their preliminary agreement over Bothoi is that General Vale is in the clear. Put in the same position, possessing similar destructive capabilities, a number of our most distinguished and experienced officers would have done the same, with similar justification too. While after-action reports and sensor logs from the surviving ships he brought home are being examined and the senior surviving officers under his command are being interviewed, that verdict isn't expected to change. Satine used the GAR's conclusion as a bait to gauge her allies' reactions, and she wasn't disappointed. Many of them were outraged, though precious few gave much of a hint. RK equals Part 2 RK equals Chancellor's Office, Senate Building, Coruscant. Chancellor Kenobi gazed at her closest allies, a calm expression on display, hiding her true feelings. She shared their outrage at the injustice of it all. Her heart cried for reckoning about all the innocents murdered by Vale and damn his justifications. Satine wanted to order her husband and the army that at least on paper answered to her to hunt him down and either kill him or drag him in front of the Senate in chains. That was such a pleasant sentiment, shared by many in her office. Yet, even if somehow worked, it would be a folly. For all the wrong reasons, at least as far as her conscience was concerned. For months now, Satine lived and breathed Coruscants and thus the cause politics. She was intimately familiar with the many factions vying for power and recognition, all the conflicting interests. She was ashamed to admit that no matter her experience with politics, her position as leader of her people and all that entailed, she had shared at least some of the delusions that many common people all across the galaxy suffered from. For her and countless others, the Republic simply was. It was a nation, a state, an idea that had survived everything that the galaxy could throw at it. That was what outsiders saw and why it was so inconceivable that separatists could be a real, successful threat. The truth, however, well, it was quite different. The Republic was by no means a nation, even if it had more people working in its government on Coruscant alone than the populations on many worlds. It was a stretch to call it a state even. The cold, hard truth was that the Republic was an alliance, one made of independent worlds, systems, alliances and even corporations, and not all of them were equal in any way, shape or form. The people gathered in her office were a nice illustration of that point. Padme Skywalker, the former Queen of Naboo, now their senator. Until recently she had been one of the most earnest and devoted idealists on Coruscant, perhaps in the whole galaxy. Her popularity, charisma and connection with Satine's predecessor gave her a unique pull in galactic politics, more than a small world like Naboo could otherwise enjoy. Padme was one of the Republic's staunchest supporters, yet she was among the first who agreed to support the Kenobi scheme. She had to know how much a success or even a failure would undermine the Republic, yet she went with it, for Naboo, for her home and people. The same was true about Bail Organa and to a lesser extent Mon Mothma. Satine couldn't be sure about the senator from Chandrila, however she suspected Mothma had resigned herself with the Republic failing some time ago and now attempted to position her world for the best possible deal it could get. And likely work from the inside to rebuild the Republic when the opportunity presented itself. Those three, while the single most tightly knit group among Satine's allies, had somewhat conflicting agendas, it couldn't be any different with Naboo under direct separatist threat. Next came Serapin, a corporate world, one of the largest and most important energy providers in the core. A primary target for the separatists, and thus their government was eager and willing to do whatever it took to win the war in exchange for security and continued profit. Anaxes, an old and powerful world with a long and distinguished military tradition. That was a place which respected its soldiers and was ready and eager to fight. Not just for the Republic but for an opportunity to place itself in a better position when the war was over, though there were some idealists among their leadership, even the military, as Admiral Yularen proved. Alzakan was one of the oldest and most powerful systems in the core, a leader of its own major faction in political and economic interests. They had a lot to gain by coming to the Republic's aid in its darkest hour, and if they played their cards right, a lot of what they lost in the past due to their rivalry with Coruscant could be regained. Those and many, many more worlds and systems, all had their interests, agendas, and Satine had a very big staff that had very hard time trying to keep everything straight, and her appraised of who was trying to backstab whom this day of the week. Even these people, her closest allies, they couldn't even agree on what should happen with Vale. Anaxes and Serapin were firmly in his corner, if for somewhat different reasons. The corporate leadership and the government representing them, well, they didn't really care what he had to do to bring the war to an acceptable conclusion. Anaxes, many among their military and government saw Vale's actions as regrettable tragedy, however they could understand why he did it, or so they claimed in the weeks after the separatist Shadowfeed broke the news about Camino and later, Sullust. Everyone saw what appeared to happen at Bothoy, and while the lengths Vale went to preserve his fleet and keep his subordinates alive were shocking, those actions bought him a number of staunch allies among the military, people who might one day find themselves in similar position or saved by either him or someone inspired by his actions. The same was true for virtually almost every single culture in the Republic that respected their soldiers and warriors. While strictly speaking, that unwavering support he gained was a minority, they were the exact same people the Republic needed to fight this war. Many among them were the same who flocked to the banners and made a great deal of the newly raised armies and freshly trained spaceship crews. Another faction was those who were mostly neutral, some loathed Vale for what he did, however had realpolitik reasons to officially support him and the Republic anyway, or it was the other way around, they had to support the Republic for various reasons and did it in spite of what that man did. Broadly speaking, there was the third faction within the Republic, those who formed the loyal opposition and hoped that sooner or later Satine and her supporters would fall from grace. Many of those maneuvered to get the best deal for their worlds that they could, and often due to location and strategic interests, they had no choice but to back the Republic if grudgingly. Many of those, along with a large number of worlds that seceded, intended to profit from the chaos, preserve their people and worlds, while hoping that the Republic that Satine led and the separatists would ground each other into space dust. Those were the broadest possible strokes about the political situation in the Republic and the details. Those were among the things that kept her awake at night. "I heard you all. I can certainly sympathize," Satine said. "Have you actually thought things through? What would happen if we attempt to arrest Vale? The consequences if we're successful, or worse, if we fail? You're afraid, Chancellor. All of you are." Anakin spoke, gathering everyone's attention. His presence as his wife's quiet shadow lately made people underestimate him, and at least a few often forget his presence. That was a dangerous thing to do, because until Geonosis he was one of the most successful Republic generals, and since the Jedi coup, the one loyal Jedi left on Coruscant. "I can sense your fear and anger, your righteous indignation," Skywalker spoke earnestly, and Satine was reminded that Padmé wasn't the only charismatic one in the family. She wasn't sure if it was the Force or just Skywalker when put his mind to it. However, when she wanted to, he got and retained everyone's attention, though this was perhaps the second, or was it the third time she saw him speak in such a way. "Of course we are. That man murders whole worlds," Mothma exclaimed, not bothering to hide her aggravation. "I can sympathize," Skywalker agreed. "It is frightening what one man can do with the Force as his weapon. I must caution you, however. I am of course not sure what the Jedi Council thought when they planned their coup. However, if I was a betting man, I would put my credits on them being afraid too. Let's be honest here, you see Vale as a threat, and he is. He is dangerous, and his allegiance isn't to the Republic. He isn't one to be swayed by the usual political games played in the Senate or in the whole Republic for that matter. I won't tell you what to do in this matter. I felt what happened at Bothoy, and I still feel dirty from the experience. I merely must caution you, Vale won't come quietly. If you decide to persecute him about his actions, be damn sure this is the best thing to do, because you will turn him into an enemy by doing so. I know that his actions are hard to swallow." The senator from Anaxis spoke while everyone else was busy digesting Anakin's words. "I won't even try to defend the morality of his actions. It is clear where he stood at the time, and while I personally might not agree with the equation, I can see where he comes from and why he did what he did. That is something I can respect. People in our position must think about all repercussions of our actions, not merely what is right, morally speaking. Does General Vale deserve to be put on a trial for Bothoy? Perhaps, though my legal advisors aren't sure what we can accuse him of. Being too overzealous in prosecuting the war? That last sentence won him a lot of angry looks. Think about the message of doing so would send to everyone, our military, our enemies, and finally, our own people. That's precisely what we are thinking," Mothma muttered. "Are you really, Senator?" The man from Anaxis merely raised an eyebrow at her, otherwise his placid expression didn't change. "I can tell you what many of our officers would think. Mr. Skywalker might shed a bit of light on that too. While some would agree with the need of investigation, if General Kenobi is right, and I have no reason to doubt it, then any action launched by the Senate could be seen as a political action against Vale. It will tell our officers that if they do something that people in the Senate disapprove of, for whatever reasons, ideological, moral, political, well, then we would be ready to throw them to the wolves." I would reluctantly agree with that assessment. For my talks with Obi-Wan, the officer corps was shaken badly by the coup and everything that followed. To put it bluntly, they find it very hard to trust our political leadership these days. Anakin reluctantly admitted. He waved an arm in a gesture that encompassed them all. The mere fact that this was necessary in the first place shook their confidence in the Republic and the Senate. All the corruption that came to the surface lately. He shook his head ruefully. "You also need to think about how the Separatist would see you persecuting Vale for Bothoy. As someone who fought them on multiple occasions and saw their atrocities firsthand, let me tell you something, there is only language that they understand, and that is naked, unrestrained power. If you want to prevent more tragedies like Naboo happening, if you want a chance to make the enemy back down and think long and hard about burning our worlds like Grievous attempted at Mandalore, then you need people like Vale and the threat of unleashing them. What about justice? What about all the innocent people who died at Bothoy?" Organa demanded. "What about the innocent people on Naboo poisoned by the Confederacy? What about the innocents dying every single moment since the Separatists brought this war to our doorsteps?" Padmé shot back. "What is to stop them from doing it again and again if we prove we aren't able or willing to respond in kind? I hate the very idea. Yet, what else is there? I once believed that we can reason with the Confederacy, however they proved me wrong. This isn't a war that can end neatly with a peace treaty we can all live with." It went on. And these were her allies. Satine was afraid to think what would happen when the good news broke and the Senate and population at large learned of Vale's survival. Stormfront =RK=, Part 3 =RK=. Observation Lounge. Republic Cruiser Shining Light. Tanab. That's the third time we've been politely asked to go visit the local commander in person. Joanna pointed out after I cut off the call with the local HQ. We aren't going until the Senate makes up their mind about us. Status of our combat-capable ships? Less than ideal. Most of the fleet has engineers crawling all over it, however our squadron is being fixed primarily by the crew of the mobile dock we brought with us. The remaining daggers and silencers were conveniently gathered in the same battle group serving with our escorts too. It wasn't paranoia on my part. Everything I learned about the political situation in the Republic rang more and more alarms in my head. Do we finally have a secure channel with General Valentra? Last we heard he would get back to us at the first opportunity. Nothing since then. That made me less than comfortable. Satine becoming a chancellor, with Kenobi as the supreme commander of the GAR, should have put me at ease. Instead, I found myself very wary of what my people on Coruscant might be cooking up for me. If push came to shove, we would be fighting our way out of Tanab. Between the special weapons in my squadron and battle meditation, we had good odds of making it out. After that, there would be no good options left. With both the Republic and the Confederacy after my hide, my only viable alternatives would be to go to ground, possibly permanently, or do whatever, bide my time until the Vong arrived or another opportunity presented itself, and do what I can to see my enemies burn out of spite if nothing else. The odd strategic assassination might help increase the chaos obviously gripping the Republic too, but those were worst-case scenarios. Delcatar, do you really believe the Republic would turn on you? Joanna asked. Well, the Jedi already did. As Mandalore, as a Sith, I am the living symbol of what many in the Republic fear and hate. I don't play the usual political games, which makes me a wild card. And my personal power and the possibility that I would not be content with merely being Mandalore is going to make a great deal of governments very nervous. Of course, there would be those who would want to see me brought down out of principle if nothing else too, those whose ambition I'm a threat to, everyone who has lost money and power due to my actions, not to mention those who lost friends and relatives at the worlds I ravaged. When you put it that way, I'm surprised that we haven't been fired upon yet. Joanna jested. In this war, all those things make me very useful weapon against the Separatists too, and so far this hasn't been a war that the Republic is winning. I pointed out. There's that. Too useful to dispose of lightly? Is that what you've been aiming at all this time? I came from the past. I had no support structure, no nation left, no allies to speak of. Unless I was willing to spend decades in the shadows, my best bet was to distinguish myself in this war. The time and place I arrived in this era more or less determined which side I would end up choosing in this conflict. The rest is history. That was the most dangerous course of action you could have chosen. It's been a very long time since I shied from danger. I shrugged. My comm beeped. Valentra finally deigned to speak with me. His image appeared in the holotank and he gave me a flat look when he saw me. Vale, you just can't keep out of trouble, can you? Why do you have to always cause so many headaches for everyone? He glared accusingly at me. I merely did what I had to in order to get back mostly intact. I waved my artificial hand for him to see. And I wasn't entirely successful at that. What the criff has been happening back on Coruscant? Talar snorted. Pure insanity. It seems everything that held the Republic together is gone and its every system, local government and corporation is out for themselves these days. Do I dare ask how Satine became the Chancellor? Didn't she tell you? She is apparently too busy to speak with me right now. Ah. Talar nodded. From what I heard from Kenobi, she's up to her neck in Krat hounds because of your return. Many of her allies want you prosecuted at the very least over Bothoi, others scream for your head, and those are just the people in our corner. Not you, I take it? I don't know what I would have done in your position. If I had the capability to get my fleet out and the price was devastating Bothoi, I would have likely used it. The same is true for many of our high-ranking officers. This war. Talar grimaced. What was once unthinkable is now very much on the table as viable tactics. What do you think would happen if enough senators demand my head? That would depend on the Chancellor. If she gives the order, a large number of our clone troopers would follow it, though few would like it. I don't know when you figured it out, but it is clear that our clone army was indoctrinated. That's why you wanted my backing to change the wording of Order 66, wasn't it? Tila accused. Knew? No. Suspected? Most certainly. I know you were desperate and had no alternative but to accept the clone army. However, its convenient appearance was mightily suspicious. If I was the one to commission and create it, I would have built in certain commands just in case. Made sure that they would follow legitimate orders no matter what. That thought crossed my mind. We couldn't figure out nothing for sure and the war was kinda distracting. When our intelligence services went rogue. Tila shrugged. My colleagues in the GAR had more immediate problems to worry about. At least I did something about it even if the truth could never see the light of day. Give it to me straight. What's our strategic situation? I changed the topic. A bit better than it appears. While the Jedi coup and Order 66 crippled us, there were a few unexpected boons from that debacle. Our strategic reserve was uncommitted during the Separatist offensive, and while the mess that followed Chancellor Kenobi's ascension led to significant losses of men and material, we're in a decent position to launch an offensive in the core. Corellia. I nodded and beside me, Joanna perked up. Corellia. Tila confirmed. It's vital that we secure the system and push the enemy back from easy striking distance of Kuat. We will have a window of opportunity before the next Separatist major construction cycle is complete. Your actions in the mid-rim mean that they wouldn't be able to pull ships from there to reinforce the core front and in fact might need to send some of their reserves there to keep an eye of this mid-rim alliance of yours. That was well done. The situation in the east? A bloody stalemate. I know what you'll ask and unfortunately, there are not enough ships to go around. I'm pretty sure I won't be able to find you a fleet to throw at Mandalore anytime soon. I do have a few ideas that might change your mind. First we'll have to see what our political overlords would decide about you. Tila frowned. I don't believe you will come in quietly if they order your arrest. From where I'm standing that's equivalent to a death warrant, so no. I will fight for the Republic, I bled for it, but that is because it was in my and Mandalorians' best interests. I won't die or be imprisoned to soothe the sensibilities of the Senate. I thought that much. For what's worth, good luck. We all would need it. Tila continued to fill me in on the sordid details of what happened on Coruscant and in the core since I left. The more he told me, the more I regretted not offing Skywalker and Plo Koon when I first arrived, grabbing Snips as my future apprentice and going to join the Confederacy. They after all were apparently the sane ones, and I found it hard to believe that Dooku and Sidious could have caused me more problems than the bloody Republic and its never sufficiently damned Senate. RK equals Senate Chamber, Senate Building, Coruscant. Satine faced the Senate from her personal platform and knew that whatever expected from it, the reality was going to be much worse. She was flanked by Bail Organa and the new speaker, a Corellian diplomat chosen for political reasons, a declaration that the Corellian people weren't forgotten nor abandoned. Below them, the senators were acting as bad as they did in the month before she became a chancellor, and Satine found it simply disgusting. This was the vaulted heart of the Republic? Those were the people meant to represent the best the galaxy had to offer? On days like these, Satine could actually sympathize with those among the separatists who genuinely didn't want to have anything with the Republic, and that was the primary reason why they joined the Confederacy. She was the Chancellor, and as often as not, more lately, she wanted to be anywhere but on Coruscant, doing her accursed job. Order. I will have order. The speaker's voice thundered. He had the lungs and bite of a drill instructor, which made him perfect for the job. With loudspeakers enhancing his angry shout, the Senate soon subdued to a mere riot. Thank you for your attention. Satine smiled pleasantly. She had a role to play after all. First, I have a declaration to make. The rumors you have heard are true. General Vale returned from the Rim and arrived at Tanab after smashing the separatist fleet holding Lantilles. As expected, shouts of approval and outrage thundered across the chamber. He will be present here today over the Holonet to answer our concerns over his actions while fighting and decimating the separatist in the Rim. Satine waved a hand and a hollow image materialized beside her. Vale was clad in the same Mandalorian-styled armor he wore on his wedding, minus helmet, and he had the gall to smile at the Senate. Chancellor Kenobi, let me offer a long overdue congratulations for being elected to this most auspicious position. I can only hope you'll continue to live up to the impossible standard put forth by your distinguished predecessor. His smile appeared genuine and tone most sincere. Of course they were. He was Mandalore and she was a Mandalorian. He had reasons to be gleeful by this turn of events, or so he thought, the bastard. Many of Satine's opponents in the chamber grumbled, some shouted in outrage at blatant the reminder who exactly was their chancellor. You have questions about what happened in the Rim? By all means, ask them. I am at the chancellor's disposal. Not the Senate's, that was something no one missed. Vale's apparel was another message he just reinforced. He wasn't merely a Republic general serving at their pleasure. He was Mandalore, a head of an allied state in his own right, and that complicated things tremendously. Bothoi. Explain yourself, General Vale. Bail Organa preempted the rising eruption from the Senate. It is simple, really. Vale began, and Satine knew that this would be an unmitigated disaster. He showed no hint of sorrow or remorse. The Bothan government betrayed us all. They conspired with the separatist and decided that my fleet and I would serve as a great gift to celebrate turning their colors. At Bothoi, I had a simple decision to make. I could fight a conventional battle that would have seen the people under my command, those I was responsible for, die avoidable deaths. Or I could do something else. I used the powers that the Force gave me to an extent beyond what my body could handle and made an example of the Bothans, displaying for the galaxy to see the price of treason. What struck Satine most was how reasonable Vale sounded as he explained for everyone to hear how he murdered a whole world. As if killing billions was no more complicated than squashing a bug. And she realized that for him, that very well might be the case. You could have surrendered, someone shouted, breaking the stunned silence that met Vale's delivery. Why would I do that? Why would I value the lives of traitors and those behind them more than the lives of loyal soldiers who had fought, bled and too often died for our cause? I deemed the continued existence of my fleet as a force to use against the separatist more valuable than the combined lives of everyone on Bothoi. As the man in command at that time and place, that was my duty both to the Republic as a general leading her soldiers and as Mandalore, who owed that and much more to my own people. Satine found herself nodding in agreement before she knew it and froze at the very idea. Predictably, the Senate erupted. Many demanded Vale be dragged in chains in front of a tribunal, others literally wanted his head mounted on a pole in front of the building, and most striking, a disturbing amount of senators screamed their approval of his justification. Satine lowered her head. This was a moment that could either restore or irrevocably shatter the eroded foundations of the Republic. And the price was the future of the one man who could conceivably save her home from the separatists' continued siege. I wonder, Vale's voice thundered, much louder and clearer than the comm unit allowing his presence should allow. What would you say if there was a separatist fleet in the sky above your homes? Would they think twice before unleashing something even nastier than the blue shadow, or merely turning them into glass from orbit if I or someone like me will do the same to them in retaliation? Would another system decide to betray us for their own selfish ambitions when the price they might pay could be everything they hold dear? Satine closed her eyes, wondering if Vale knew exactly what he was doing. He put her into a corner, and his words, just a few accursed words, were enough to sunder the Republic and guarantee that now there would be no turning back, no matter what happened today. Damn that man.